as human beings, require intelligence to function in life. Apart from the technical intelligence, which we definitely need to learn a language, to learn a task, to learn how to drive, to learn how to do math, to understand basic intellectual concepts. We need intelligence for all of that. But apart from that, there is an intelligence that one requires to live a life which doesn't have conflict, a life which is not petty, which is which is not which doesn't have struggle, strife, which is simple, easy, joyful. And so, how is one to have such an intelligence, to live a life without any distortion, without any corruption, with great understanding, with wisdom? How is one to have such an intelligence? There is the intelligence of the body, which takes care of all the mechanical functions within the physical organism, which involves getting away, sensing fear, taking care of all the digestive motions, healing a wound, breathing, beating of the heart, and so on. There are a lot of bodily functions which requires an intelligence, and we find that the physical organism, which is the brain, which is the physical organ, is quite adept, is quite efficient in taking care of all of these functions, because it has evolved through time, it has evolved through millions of years. It develops in a certain way, and by the time it is fully developed, it is able to take care of all the physical bodily mechanisms. So that is one intelligence, which is the intelligence of the body, which keeps the physical organism fully alive, fully functioning without any lapse. So, what is that intelligence which helps us to lead a life? Because our life is simply not a physical movement, is not a movement where only we need to live by our physical conditioning. One has to have a deeper understanding to live a life, to not be involved in conflict, to not suffer, to not be anxious, to not be fearful, to not be miserable, to have actual relationships and not superficial company and attachments in the name of relationships, to not have sorrow, travail in one's life. One has to have such an intelligence which understands life in its totality. The psychological intelligence is required to live a life which is at its heart actually alive and not merely functioning on the physical structure, not merely operated by the brain, because brain, apart from serving its physical functions that keeps the body alive, it also takes charge of what we think, what we feel, how we are going to act, what we are going to say, etc. So if left to its own condition, we see that brain, apart from taking care of the physical organism, takes over the psychological function according to which we live our life, and it directs thoughts, feelings, actions based upon all the psychological content which is available in its surroundings, the experiences, our memory. We will find how these two, the experiences and memory, shape, help the brain to run our life psychologically. It will tell us how to relate, it will tell us how to act. The brain will operate how we live our day to day life. And so, simply allowing the brain to run on its to run on the contents of its past through memory, through experiences, is not the best way to live one's life, because that way of existence would then also be mechanical, because as brain takes care of all the physical needs which have evolved through a lot of years, similarly the brain will take care of our psychological functions and will operate on the memory in which it holds all of its content, its experiences, its values, its principles, its beliefs, its notions, its ideas. All this is continuously being fed to the brain. By simply existing in an environment, in a culture, in a society, brain keeps on registering, recording things around it, and in our surroundings it sees what is going on, how people talk, how people act, the language they use. It records the other's selfishness, it records the other's animosity, it understands the kind of conversation two people are having, and if there is any hostility in it, if there is any exploitation involved in that. The brain registers the beliefs it is exposed to, the way one should lead one's life, what one should aspire to, what one should desire. All of these things we will find are continuously being fed to the brain, and upon this data, upon these instructions, the brain will start to operate our life. Our life would be simply based on the conditions, the experiences that we exist in. And so intelligence comes when one is able to understand this very quality of the brain, that how it is vulnerable, susceptible to acting or imitating its environment. How, when we do not pay attention to the functioning of the brain, it simply acts and functions in a mechanical way, and that mechanical way being that it runs on a program, it runs in a set on a set of instructions, it operates on codes, and these codes, this set of instructions, this program is designed by the environment it lives in, the experiences it has, the conditions it has grown up in. Intelligence is then to see this complete mechanical function of the brain, which is all right when it comes to the physical organism, but is harmful, dangerous when it comes to living one's life. Intelligence is then the quiet observation of the functioning of the brain, seeing how the brain operates, where does it act from, how the demand for security makes the brain chase gratification, chase security at places where there is none. Intelligence is to see how brain yearns to be secure in a relationship, in an ideology, in a belief, in a system, how brain runs on a pattern, multiple patterns simultaneously. The careful, attentive observation of the functioning of the brain is intelligence. And to see how brain actually uses the intellect to its advantage, and the notion of advantage, the notion of what is right for it, what is good for it, also comes from the program it runs on. So it basically conforms, uses the intellect to conform to the pre-existing code program that it is operating on. Intellect simply becomes a tool in the hands of a conditioned brain, which uses the ability to calculate, to theorize, to explain, to meet its end. Intelligence then is to see how one cannot simply operate on this combination of brain and intellect. That if we were to live our life simply based on what our intellect tells us, on how the brain is programmed, is to live partially, is to not live completely, because this functioning of the brain is actually limited. It functions within a set of codes which it has acquired from its environment, and beyond that code, beyond that program, it knows nothing else, and so it is limited. It doesn't operate wholly, fully. It doesn't have a sense of wholeness to it. The approach, the way the brain functions, the way it uses the intellect for its own end, is fragmentary. It is unable to address the life in its totality. It only functions in its own limited patterns. Intelligence then is to see these patterns, is to see the tendency of the brain to operate within limits, and how these very limits makes it feel secure, and how this security is actually not real. It is only an idea, a belief of security, because in this very security is a sense of insecurity, is a sense of danger, is fear. Whatever the brains find security in a relationship, in a group, in an identity, in a belief, all of it fears to lose. It fears to lose its identity of a profession, a doctor, a lawyer, a businessman. It fears to lose the relationships it has, its boyfriend, its girlfriend, its parents, its son. It fears to lose its own beliefs, its own religious beliefs, which it holds dearly, which are in fact the compass of its life. All of these things in which brain finds security within them is also fear involved. Fear of losing my relationships, losing my identity, losing the beliefs that I have based my life on, that I hold on to tightly. So there is no security anywhere for the brain, and it is intelligence, and it is the close observation of this operation of the brain where intelligence begins to blossom. Intelligence is in the very understanding of how brain constantly deceives itself. It thinks there is security in isolation. It thinks there is security in dividing oneself. It thinks there is security in separating oneself from the environment it lives in. And this separation comes in the form of my family, my religion, my country, my beliefs. All of this sense of separation is not real. It doesn't have any basis, because brain in itself is a physical organism, and so whatever it functions on is also material like. Its entire functioning is based on a pattern which is mechanical. The instructions, the principles that it runs on are fed in its memory, in its cell. They are recorded, registered through experiences, and it is this bag of the past on which brain functions. The program it is running on is continuously being bolstered, being strengthened by its experiences, through its interaction with the environment. Every experience is conditioning the brain to think and act in a particular way, and it is on this conditioning the brain runs. So this process is entirely mechanical, material, and intelligence then is immaterial. It is not simply stored in the brain, it is understanding. There is that ability of the brain which can understand its own functioning, and that is actually intelligence. It has no material basis. This quality, the ability to observe, understand, is not based, does not come from memory. It is not something that can be programmed. It is not dependent upon code. The brain can look at itself, and that looking is intelligence. The brain can see its own limitations, the patterns upon which it is operating. And from this looking, from this watching, comes understanding, and this understanding is intelligence, and that is not fragmented in its nature, that is whole, it is not limited. It, this intelligence doesn't operate in a restricted area, it doesn't operate separatively, it is not limited like intellect, it is not fragmented, it is whole, it is holistic in nature. The watchfulness, observation of the functioning of the brain is intelligence. When the brain can see how it is deceiving itself, that how it takes gratification, sensory gratification for peace, there is a sense of a becoming effect. There is a becoming effect when the senses are gratified, but it understands that this becoming effect of the gratification of senses is a physical process. One cannot simply pursue this gratification and continue to live their life on it. One has to understand this tendency of the brain, its need to gratify itself, its need to find something beyond itself. It is not simply satisfied with the fulfillment of physical needs, which is food, shelter, and clothing. It is not, it cannot simply live on that. It needs something more than that. And that demand for more, for fulfillment, to seek something beyond the mind, it is that demand where the brain begins to distort itself, and it seeks this thing which is beyond the mind in societal recognition, in grand experiences, in gratification of the senses, in entertainment. The brain fulfills itself through these outward things, experiences, fame, reputation, the comfort of companionship. Brain seeks fulfillment in these things, and intelligence is to see that there is no fulfillment in all its endeavors that it has created for itself, that there is no fulfillment in being famous, in being known, there is no beyondness in a heightened experience, there is no real security in companionship. In this understanding alone can the brain actually dissolve its tendency to seek something beyond itself. The complete understanding of oneself gives rest to all the restless activity of the brain. The constant demand for pleasure, for fulfillment, shows the lack of intelligence the brain has. It also displays the limitation of intellect, that one can only exercise intellect in a technical field, in knowledgeable pursuits, and beyond that it finds that there is still this hunger for more. This hunger for more is only quenched, is only addressed through understanding, seeing how one functions psychologically, understanding the different patterns, ways, demands of the brain. This is actual intelligence. To rid oneself of all of the mechanical existence where there is where it is not required. There is a certain part of life which will be mechanical, which is all physical, and to limit the brain's functions only to the physical domain where this mechanical operation is essential, and not allow it to take over our entire life, how we see things, take over our relationships, how we act, how we think. If our thinking, our relationships, our understanding of life comes from this mechanical operation of the brain, we are simply operating in a very limited way. One is not living fully, entirely. Intelligence is then to give brain, intellect, and the mechanical operation their right place. Intelligence is living without any distortions, without any corruptions. Intelligence is living rightly, totally, without limiting oneself to a groove, to a pattern, to a belief. And this intelligence alone gives meaning to life. Only in this intelligence there can be compassion, there can be love, there can be the warmth in which a relationship abides.